Washington is presenting the Ukraine peace talks as a major breakthrough. President Trump has praised what he calls tremendous progress. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said that discussions in Geneva were very positive and insisted that only a few items are still unresolved. But a senior Ukrainian official with a direct knowledge of the negotiations tells a very different story. Speaking to CNN, the official said there are still serious obstacles that could decide the future of the entire process. According to this source, a consensus has indeed been reached on many points in the 28-item U.S. proposal, but at least 3 key issues remain open, and they are the most sensitive ones for Ukraine. The first is the question of territory. The U.S. plan originally suggested Ukraine hand over parts of the Donbas to become a Russian-controlled demilitarized zone. The Ukrainian official says discussions continue, but there is no approved wording and no final decision. It would be very wrong, the source said, to claim that Ukraine has accepted this. The second issue is the size of Ukraine's future army. Washington proposed a ceiling of 600,000 troops. Kyiv has pushed back and wants a higher number. Talks on this point are also still ongoing. The third unresolved issue is perhaps the most fundamental. Ukraine has been asked to give up its ambition to join NATO. According to the Ukrainian official, this remains unacceptable. They warn that such step would set a dangerous precedent and allow Russia to influence a military alliance it is not even part of. All 3 demands align with Russia's long-standing goals. They are the very reasons the Kremlin cites for launching the full-scale invasion. And they are the same red lines for which Ukrainian soldiers have fought and died for nearly 4 years. Any decision to step away from them would carry enormous political and moral risk for Kyiv. So despite the positive language coming from Washington, the reality inside the talks is far more complicated. There is no final agreement, and the biggest issue remains wide open.
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process, smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
No matter what is happening at the negotiating table, Russia is not slowing down its attacks on Ukraine and on its people. Russian airstrikes have again hit the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, leaving 18 people wounded and damaging dozens of buildings overnight. Ukraine's State Emergency Service released a video showing firefighters battling intense flames across several neighborhoods. Local officials say the city was struck 11 times. 7 apartment blocks, a gas station, a shop, and other civilian sites were damaged. In total, more than 30 multi-story buildings and 20 private homes were hit. Russian strikes on Ukraine's gas infrastructure are creating a deepening energy crisis just weeks before winter. The Associated Press gained exclusive access to one of Naftogaz's damaged gas facilities in central Ukraine, where the ground is still scored and pieces of Shahed drones remain scattered across the site. The attacks in February and March destroyed more than 40% of Ukraine's gas production. Then, at the end of October, Russia carried out another massive wave of combined missile and drone strikes, the largest since the start of the full-scale invasion. Several key gas facilities were hit again, causing new heavy losses. Naftogaz says that because of the destruction, Ukraine has lost a significant portion of its domestic gas output. To keep country warm this winter, Ukraine will now have an additional 4.4 billion cubic meters of gas. This is a huge financial burden at a time when the country is already stretched by war. The company says about 30% of the required imports are still not covered. Negotiations are underway with American financial institutions to secure the funds needed to buy U.S. liquefied natural gas. Officials stress that gas facilities have no military purpose and that Russia is deliberately targeting civilian energy infrastructure to leave Ukrainians without heat, light, and gas during the coldest months of the year. And despite ongoing diplomatic talks about a possible peace plan, these strikes are a clear reminder Russia is not slowing its attacks on Ukrainian cities, homes, or energy systems.
Due to the fact that gas infrastructure has nothing to do with military needs, the destruction of gas production, gas storage, and gas distribution has only one goal: maniacal terrorist attacks to leave Ukrainians without heat, gas, and electricity this winter.
The European Union has outlined its core conditions for any future peace agreement on Ukraine. Speaking in Strasbourg, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen listed 5 principles that Europe says cannot be compromised. First, any deal must bring a just and lasting peace with a real security guarantees for Ukraine and for Europe. And as a sovereign nation, Ukraine cannot face restrictions on the size or strength of its armed forces. Second, Ukraine's full sovereignty must be protected. Von der Leyen warned that accepting Russia's territorial seizures would open the door to new wars, and the EU will not allow that. She reaffirmed that Ukraine's future lies inside the European Union as part of Europe's long-term security architecture. The third priority is financial support. EU leaders have already committed to covering Ukraine's needs for 2026 and 2027, and the Commission is now preparing the legal framework for using frozen Russian assets. The fourth principle is simple: no decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine, no decisions about Europe without Europe, and no decisions about NATO without NATO. And the fifth priority is the return of every Ukrainian child taken by Russia. The European Commission emphasized that its work on Ukraine's financial package continues regardless of ongoing discussions around the US peace plan. In France, police have arrested 3 people suspected of spying for Russia and spreading pro-Kremlin propaganda. The case centers on a French-Russian association called SOS Donbass, which investigators say was used to gather sensitive information and push Russian narratives inside France. According to prosecutors, one of the suspects, a 40-year-old Russian man, was caught on surveillance cameras putting up pro-Russia's protests on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris back in September. Shortly afterward, he contacted the head of SOS Donbass, a 40-year-old man born in Russia who had already been under surveillance by French counterintelligence for months. Investigators say she attempted to obtain economic information from French business leader and was linked to activities that could harm the fundamental interest of the nation. A judge opened a full investigation earlier this year under charges that include colluding with a foreign state, an offense that carries up to 10 years in prison. SOS Donbass presents itself publicly as a humanitarian group helping civilians in eastern Ukraine, but authorities say evidence suggests that organization played a role in advancing Russia's information operations. This comes as other European countries, including Latvia, report new arrests of individuals accused of spying or carrying out sabotage on behalf of Russian intelligence services. Ukraine is preparing for the possibility that US military support could sharply decline if Kyiv refuses President Trump's peace plan. But analysts tell Politico that even without Washington, Ukraine would still keep fighting. Europe cannot fully replace the United States in the short term, especially when it comes to Patriot air defense missiles and long-range strike capability. But European governments are now supplying several times more military aid than Washington and are directly buying US weapons for Ukraine under the PURE program. Experts note that Ukraine already produces around 60% of what it needs on the battlefield, from drones to artillery ammunition. The remaining gap, however, still includes the most critical items: ballistic missiles, interceptors, advanced air defense, and some precision weapons. Intelligence support is another challenge. US satellite systems give Ukraine early warning before Russian missile strikes, and Europe does not yet have anything comparable. Losing that advantage would immediately raise the number of casualties. Still, analysts say Ukraine's determination is not in question. The country has survived severe weapon shortages, constant missile attacks, and weeks of fighting with minimal supplies. They argue that even in the worst-case scenario, Ukraine will keep resisting, but the war would become far more dangerous, unpredictable, and costly. German's Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Vladimir Putin must finally understand that he has no chance of winning the war in Ukraine. Speaking in the Bundestag during budget debates, Merz addressed the growing pressure from Washington's peace push. He said Europe wants the war to end, but never on terms that amount to Ukraine's capitulation. Merz stressed that the real peace is impossible without Ukraine's consent and without Europe's approval. He noted that Europe is not a pawn and has its own security interests and values, and decisions about Ukraine cannot be made over Europe's head. The German Chancellor welcomed President Trump's efforts to stop the war, but reminded that any agreement must include Ukraine and European partners, otherwise it cannot last. Merz repeated that Russia could end the war within minutes if it truly wanted peace. He said Germany will keep supporting Ukraine for as long as needed and confirmed Berlin is ready to use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. He added that next year Germany will increase its support to Ukraine to more than 11.5 billion euros. That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.